Hi, this is Jason from Effective Dashboards, helping maintenance and reliability professionals get the most out of Power BI. So welcome back to another video. In this video, we'll be looking at the ribbon chart. So I'll be looking at the ribbon chart and how you set it up, and what it is, and what the features are, and I'll be specifically covering 3 different applications of the ribbon chart. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing what I've done here is I've set up a ribbon chart, but actually I'm going to go and just delete this and I'll just start from scratch. So here we've got this ribbon chart, and that's the icon there. And I'm going to go and we're going to look at schedule attainment. So schedule attainment is simply looking at at the start of a week you put a schedule together of a number of different work orders, and at the end of the week you measure how many of those work orders were actually executed and achieved. Okay, so if you did 15 of the 30 work orders, it would be 50%. So we've got this schedule attainment data set here. So each week we've got a schedule attainment number or percentage for a specific department. So it's a really straightforward data set here. I don't want to get too hung up on that. At some point in the future, I will show you how to actually calculate this schedule attainment figure. But for just now, we're just looking at how we can display the information. So I'm going to start off with the date, and I'm going to bring that in as the axis. And then I'm going to bring in the schedule attainment measure, which is just a value. And we can see here we've just got what looks like a bar chart, a column chart, sorry. And it isn't until we add the legend here that we start to see this turn into a ribbon chart and really come alive. So before we go on, let's just add in the data labels so we can see these. So first of all, the ribbon chart is a combination of a column chart, a stacked column chart, and a line chart, okay, a line graph. And we can see that here. So you can see this, we've got the stacked columns here, and we've got these lines that connect to each one of the data points as well. So let's look at what the benefits of this are over both these other options. So first of all, if I change this back to a stacked column chart, okay, what we've got here, and I don't really like these stacked column charts because I think apart from the one at the bottom here, it's really difficult to compare values like for like. But what's happened here is each one of these is stacked based on the alphabetical order of the actual legend here that's used. So we can see drillings at the bottom right through to services at the top. Now that kind of makes sense because they're kind of next to each other most of the time, but like I say, it's a bit difficult to compare these, so I would never normally use this too much. But having said that, it's very difficult in each one of these to understand which of these values or which of these departments was the highest. So this first one here is pretty obvious. We can see that's 96. The second one, we're looking down, we can see that's 80. This one here is 70. So we've got to kind of search for it. There's 97 at the bottom here. And it just adds a cognitive load to us to understand, okay, who was the highest ranked at schedule attainment or whatever it is you're measuring each week. So if we go back and change this back into this ribbon chart, that is the first advantage here. These are sorted not by this alphabetical order here, but by the actual value, okay, from high to low. So we can see 96 is the highest there, we can see that 87, 89 is the highest there, etc., etc. Then we can see, so that's the stacked element, the stacked column chart element of that. The next part is the line graph, and we can see that we've got a line between each one of these legends, okay, each one of these categories here that's in the legend. And that allows us to see how its relative performance changes over time really easily. So we can see this was pretty low down here, it was number 4, then it went up to number 2, stayed at number 2, 3, and then it was a top performer for a couple of weeks there. So we can really see, if we hone in on one of these, we can see how it's changed over time. This one at the bottom here, what's this one here? This is operations, so they've been consistently low. We can see that. The other ones have been, that's had a top performer there. So we can kind of see really quickly who's above who. And if that's really important for your data, and you want to foster maybe a bit of competition, then this can be quite useful for seeing that information in one place. So that's the main advantage there of the, for the ribbon chart. Now the second part is you get additional tooltip information completely free. When I say free, without any configuration options or configuration requirements. So we can see here this was 90% here for drilling, and then the next week it was 72%. But if we hover in the section in the middle, we can see the tooltips changed and it's showing us some additional information. So we've got the value on the 5th, which was 90, we've got the value on the 12th, which was 72, which we can see anyway on the screen, but it gives you that information. Then we've got the actual change. So the change is actually in two values. Now, because we're showing percentages, it's a little bit slightly difficult to see this, but actually the first value in that schedule attainment percentage change is the absolute difference, 18 percentage points, and then in brackets we've got the percentage difference between the two. So as it came down by 18 percentage points, and that's a 20% drop from the previous example, a previous value. So 72% is a 20% reduction from 90%. So if we were using an absolute value, which we'll show in a second, you'll see that that percentage is actually a percentage of the two differences. So hopefully you understand that. That was my using percentages there. Then we've got underneath, we've got the rank for the first week and the rank for the second week. So we were first and then we went to third, and then that difference is 2%. Sorry, 2 points or 2 places. So we can see we're down 2 places. And that information is available for each one of these so that you can carry out a little bit of just on the spot analysis. So this one went up 2 places and had a 20% increase. So really useful. And yeah, it could be useful as well if we're looking at cost or a number of different aspects of maintenance or even reliability. But this is schedule attainment. So yeah, so that's pretty much the setup and the first example of how we can use a ribbon chart. Okay, so let's look at some of the configuration options. So we've got this ribbon chart here. Under general, we've got just the usual stuff where we can set the XY position and the size. In legend, we can switch that on and off. That's going to allow us to switch on and off the legend at the top. I would say keep it on for this example here because it's not going to be obvious. You're going to have to hover over each one of these to be able to see what that values are otherwise, so I would tend to leave the legend on. You can choose the position of the legend, so you can have it at the top or the bottom. For this example, I would suggest that at the top is fine if you've only got 5 for these, but I am going to make it slightly smaller. Doesn't need to be as big, just to make it slightly subtler and emphasize the actual values itself. And again, you can change the setup here and switch off the title if you need to. So we'll leave that on for just now. X-axis, continuous or categorical, we'll just leave it at continuous for just now. Categorical simply puts in a date for each one of these, so each one of these is essentially a category in its own right. Continuous will just put the basically we'll distribute it across the range of dates, and it'll summarize these dates here. I quite like it this way, but sometimes you do need it categorical. Yeah, categorical. So you can switch between the two there. The start and end, auto start and auto end, I'm just going to leave it as it is for this example here. And yeah, that's the examples there. Lots of examples for configuring the x-axis. Zoom sliders, these allow you to zoom in and out if you want to. I don't tend to use those, but you can if you want to. Data colors, now this will just come from your data palette that you've got set up, but you can obviously override this for these examples here if you want to. The two greys are quite similar, so maybe you would override that with another color there, but I'm going to leave it for just now. Then we've got the data labels. Now the data labels, I've switched those on and they look fine. The units are okay, decimal places is fine. You can change the orientation. I just think if you change it to that, it's going to be difficult for people to read, so I would leave it at the horizontal. And if we go down, we can change the size, etc. There's a couple here. This label density allows you to reduce the density of the labels. Now, if you've got quite a lot of periods. If you're doing it over a year or over a few months, then that might be something to look at, so that you can actually reduce the amount of noise in terms of the labels, and you maybe just want to focus on, okay, who's top and who's, what position are people in, rather than necessarily understanding the exact value, and then you can hover it over to understand the value itself. So that could be something that's worth playing about with. Now the other thing you can do is you can show the background there. We'll just leave that as it is, change that background color. But this customized series, now that could be useful if you want to portray a certain message. So say for example, this was a graph and you wanted to highlight the drilling schedule attainment performance. Now we've used this blue, so it's naturally highlighted anyway, but you might want to customize this individual series, and you might want to say, well, actually for drilling I want to make the text slightly larger. Now it's disappeared there, but what I'm going to show you is what this text overflow does. Now there's a text overflow button which is up here. Okay, so if you press that text overflow, it will allow it to overflow into these little sections at the side. So you might want to basically highlight this drilling performance, and with that in mind, you might also want to go and customize the series and say, well, actually I want to de-emphasize some of the other ones. So if I went to engineering, and you might want to not show that one, maintenance, operations, and services. So you might just want to show this here, which I think is pretty nifty, particularly if you want to take this and you want to use it in a presentation where you are the drilling manager or somebody that represents a particular department. So that's an example where you can use this to try and support a message and just really show how your performance is in comparison to other sites or to other departments. Okay, so I've reset that defaults there, and then the rest of it, plot area, this is just if you want to add an image behind it or change the transparency. Now ribbons, there's a couple of examples here, or a couple of options here. The first one is spacing. So just now there's no spacing between each of these ribbons. So if I change that to 3, we can see it adds a little bit of white space in there that just allows you to emphasize the difference between each one of these, which I think is, it could be quite useful in certain circumstances. I don't know if I've got a strong opinion on whether to use that or no at the moment, but that option is there. Match color series, I think that's worth using, particularly in this example here. For this, we're showing percentages, so this stack really doesn't add up to, that doesn't represent a whole. Okay, these are just numbers, these are just percentages. So I would leave that on there. And then we've got transparency. So that's the section between the ribbons. So I think 30% is fine. Now you can add a border in that just actually emphasizes each one of these, the line aspects of it. But I think it's fine without it. I think the fact that there's a different color there, that the colors are different enough for that border, and I think, yeah, you can just add the border on it. It just gives you a slightly darker, less transparent color. So quite a few different options there to set this up, but in essence it's a combination of a stacked column chart and a line chart, line graph. Okay, so let's look at a second example. So in this second example here, what I've done is I've called this one here contribution to a whole. So these are the number of, when we look at non-compliance, okay, so the previous example was looking at schedule attainment. Now as part of the whole process, we've also got a process for coding up each of the work orders that were not achieved, so we can understand what's blocked us or what's blocking us from achieving that work. And we've got some categories here like admin error, break-in, displace the work, equipment was not released, so we can get access to the equipment to go and maintain it. There's an other, and there's planning issues with contractors, planning issues with our own labour estimates, and planning issues with availability of spares. Okay, so these are things that could just stop us from getting the work completed. And in here I'm showing the stacked bar charts again, or the ribbon charts again. I've got this white lines in between, which we talked about in the previous one. So if we go to ribbon, I've got a spacing. I'm just going to get rid of that for just now. Now for each one of these, the difference is that this actually represents the total sum of all of the values. Okay, so the 16 plus the 11 plus the 10, the 6 and the 4, this represents all of the non-attained values. So not only can we see if we're the height of each one of these is telling us how much work was not attained, because it represents the total of all the work orders that were not attained. But you've also got, for each of the different categories, we can see how that is trending over time. Okay, so we can see here we've got this one here, which is other. So the others were 11, and then there were 13, and then there were 16. So that's really telling us that we need to start coding or creating codes, because other should be used as a last resort. So that's giving us some information to say that none of these other codes here could be used. So we need to start thinking of other codes that might be stopping us from actually categorizing that information. And again, we can see that others were quite high across here. We can see clearly that the administration error is very low at the bottom here and trending very low. And yeah, so that's another example here. So the main difference here is that this stacked bar chart represents the cumulative total broken down by this non-compliance reason, so that we can also see, are we getting better or worse over time. And it looks like we're getting better than this example here, where we went from high. Now we can't actually see the total value, that's the only trouble with this, but you can see that we're trending down in terms of the total value of work that was not achieved. So yeah, that's a second example there. And of course you've got if you hovered over it, we've got the difference in terms of the absolute value and the percentage difference for that particular category. So other went from 16 to 10, which was a reduction in 6, and that's a reduction of 37.5%. So that's the example there where we can see the reduction in absolute terms and in percentage terms. And it went from first to third, and it was a drop of 2. Okay, so that's the second example. The third example is where we've got, rather than a stacked, this example here, where we've got this stacked column chart, we've set this up so it represents a 100% stacked column chart. So it's slightly different. And what we're doing here is we're looking at the percentage. So regardless of the absolute value, we're looking at which percentage of each one of these codes was the highest contributor to each week. So we can see this one here as equipment not released contribute 25%, then 27%, then 34%, then 29%. Okay, so it's not the absolute value, but on that particular week, it's actually looking at what was the percentage of contribution. We can see that this department displaced due to break-in work, so another break-in activities came into the schedule, and something's had to give, so we've rescheduled work into the future, and that was a growing trend over this period of time here, and then with a reduction, and then it settled out as being fairly low, and we can see that admin errors have still been fairly consistently low over the piece at the bottom there. So this is another third example where we've got a stacked bar, or like basically a combination of one of these ones here, 100% stacked column chart and basically a line chart. Okay, so the measure here, just before I go, the measure here, you can go in and check it out for getting this percentage. If I go into this data here, so you can see this measure here, because I've had to calculate a percentage each week, what this percentage here is of the total for that particular week. So it's in here. It's reasonably complicated, so I'm not going to go into it in too much detail here. But if you're used to using DAX, then you can see that. Go and check out that DAX there when you download this file from the website. Right, so I think I've kind of covered the ribbon chart. I think it's good. It's a combination of two charts. Needs a little bit of discussion and a little bit of education just for the end user to understand what it is. But once they understand what it is, you do get a lot from it, and it does give you a lot of insights into the data, particularly trending it over time and where it is, if you want to see like a kind of leaderboard, a highest contributor, and where they are stacked up against each other over time. So if you're interested in learning more about Power BI, then check out the courses in the section below. And if you want to keep up to date with the latest videos, then click the subscribe button. And of course, if you like this video, it would be useful and appreciated if you could give me a thumbs up. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you in the next video.